Why is the narrative of a highly advanced civilization submerged under the waters such a popular subject in world cultures? Is it because it sounds pleasant? Is it out of the curiosity we feel toward our unsolvable past? Or is it because we collectively remember this catastrophe in our subconscious? In the videos I made in recent weeks about the Hawara Labyrinth and the Sumerian King List, this event was always the common denominator. The mysterious sunken island of the gods which was lost to the flood and from which surviving sages regrew civilization. Today, the most popular approach to this is Atlantis. However, in this third step of our journey, we will investigate the subject not only through Plato's accounts, but also through its shadows in Eastern civilizations and stories hidden on dusty pages. And you will see just how deep the answer to the question I just asked you lies. Welcome to Find the Truth. Before we begin, let me briefly remind you, this is the third video in our February Ancient Era series. To understand this, you need to watch the first video on the Hawara Labyrinth and the second video on the Sumerian King List. The links will be in the description section. If you are ready, press those buttons, lean back, and enjoy the journey. As you know, the most well-known and detailed origin of global sunken continent narratives in the Western world is Plato's works. However, Plato clearly states that the source of this magnificent legend was not his own philosophical imagination, but was inherited from Solon, the famous Athenian lawmaker and poet who was the forefather of knowledge. Solon's visits in the 6th century BC to Egypt, specifically to the city of Sais, the cult center of the goddess Neith, who was identified with the Greek goddess Athena, are the most critical point forming the foundation of our story. Welcomed with great respect in the city of Sais, Solon entered into deep conversations with Egyptian priests, who were the most knowledgeable in ancient sciences, to obtain information about ancient history. When Solon tried to prove the deep-rooted past of his own civilization by recounting Greece's oldest myths, Pharaonius, Niobe, and the genealogies of the survivors of the famous Deucalion and Pyrrha flood, an elderly Egyptian priest named Sonchis gave him this historic and philosophically jarring answer. "O Solon, you Greeks are always children. There is no old soul among you. For in your souls there is no belief originating from an ancient tradition, no knowledge aged by time." Priest Sonchis explained that the reason no ancient belief or tradition whitened by ages existed in the Greek mind was that humanity had been periodically destroyed repeatedly by disasters of fire and water. According to the Egyptian account, the earth is scorched from time to time by celestial bodies deviating from their orbits, after which the gods send great floods to cleanse the world with water. In these cycles of disaster, only illiterate mountain shepherds far from civilization survived in regions like Greece, and thus social memory was reset every time. However, because Egypt was nourished by the waters of the Nile rising from below and protecting its bed rather than by rain, it was protected from these disasters of fire and water, and managed to preserve the ancient history of all humanity for thousands of years, undeformed on the pillars of its temples. Priest Sonchis gave a bit of an insult while providing information there. In the ancient texts that are the subject of Egyptian hieroglyphs and Albert Schlossman's research, this homeland is called Ahamem Ta, meaning Ta's first heart or country. Schlossman, as a result of his studies on the zodiac and calendar at the Dendera temple, specified the sinking date of this continent as July 27th, 9792 BC. This date is almost exactly the same as the 9600 BC date given by Plato, and the dates modern geology provides for the end of the Younger Dryas period, the occurrence of the event we call the flood. By the way, do not forget Albert Schlossman. In the final video of the series, we will include accounts from some extraordinary inscriptions he found, describing how the sun once rose in the west and set in the east, how the stars shifted positions, and how the great disaster followed. Academia, indoctrinated with the logic that West equals civilization, does not like these narratives. However, as detailed in the Greek historian and biographer Plutarch's works Life of Solon and on Isis and Osiris, Solon engaged in deep dialogues on philosophy, cosmology, and ancient history with the priest Xenopus of Heliopolis and the priest Sonchis of Sais during his nearly 10-year stay in Egypt. Plutarch's records serve to prove that Egypt functioned as a kind of ancient world university at that time. Indeed, Thales of Miletus, Eudoxus of Cnidus, Pythagoras, Plato, and many other Greek philosophers and scientists traveled to Egypt. They underwent initiation processes by meeting with Egyptian priests. For example, Eudoxus with Chronophis of Memphis and Pythagoras with Enophis of Heliopolis. And with the knowledge they learned there, they established the ancient Greek-based schools known as Western civilization today. From advanced mathematics to democracy, from atomic physics to ideas that we today call quantum fields surrounding the universe, they learned the foundations of all of these from ancient schools in the East, primarily Egypt. And those who taught them explained that they had learned and recorded this information from the Shemsu Hor, Owans, or Rishis who came from the Sunken island. Let's return to our topic. The most striking piece of information priest Sonchis shared with Solon was about a great war that took place 9,000 years ago between Athens and Atlantis, followed by a catastrophe. According to the priest, as a result of the terrible earthquakes and floods following this war, the continent of Atlantis sank to the bottom of the sea in a single day and night, leaving behind an impassable sea of mud. Considering Solon was in size around 600 BC, the 9,000 years the priest mentioned corresponds to approximately 11,600 years ago. This date is nearly the same period as the calculations from Dendera by Albert Schlossman. This time coincides with incredible mathematical precision with the event known in modern paleoclimatology as Meltwater Pulse 1b, when the last ice age ended abruptly and sea levels rose dramatically worldwide due to the melting of massive glaciers. Solon was mesmerized by what he heard and asked the priest to tell the story of these old citizens, the sunken continent, and the forgotten ancestors in full detail. This narrative of the ancient Egyptian priests is not an ordinary legend carved into temple pillars, but a meticulously recorded version of a global geological catastrophe. The philosopher Crantor also stated in the 4th century BC that the story of Atlantis was still written on pillars preserved in Sais. Unfortunately, Sais is in ruins today, and only some fragments remain of these pillars mentioned by the ancient Greeks. However, I need to give some intermediate information here. The narrative of the war between the Atlanteans and the Athenians does not appear in the Egyptian records in that way. As always, people modified it to bring their own race to the forefront, and our Greek brothers, purely to glorify Athens, added groundless stories saying the Atlanteans were an invading force. But the sacred founding fathers of Athens stopped them at the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, and founded our civilization. Everyone has done this throughout history. It's not a very surprising narrative style. I'm providing this information to avoid confusion. In the more Egyptian, pure essence of the event, especially seen in the Edfu texts, it speaks of a land located in the middle of the ocean at the beginning of everything, known as the Island of Creation or the Egg Island. This island is the homeland of the Primordials, or a sacred group called the Shebti-W, meaning creator beings or light beings. According to the narrative in the text, there was a great hill in the center of this prosperous island of the gods, and the island hosted a unique civilization before it was destroyed by cosmic and geological catastrophes. While describing the destruction of the island, the reliefs and hieroglyphs on the walls mention a great serpent attacking from the sky. In ancient cultures, the motif of the fiery serpent, or winged serpent descending from the sky, is the most prominent and universal metaphor for comets and meteor impacts in modern astrophysical symbolism. And we see this motif even at Göbekli Tepe. I will come to that in a moment. After the serpent's attack, there is a break in the text. Light disappears. A pitch-black darkness covers the world, and the great island sinks into the depths of the waters. Sages who survived the island's sinking traveled the world in boats after the disaster, carrying their lost wisdom to other lands, especially Egypt, and rebuilt civilization from the ashes. This was the more popular part, the mixture of Egyptian and Greek. However, the narrative of a sunken island and sages coming from there has a much wider distribution. And now we continue our journey to examine the texts of the ancient civilizations of the East, and we are met with the realms full of mysteries, Kumari Kandam and Lemuria. While Atlantis sank into the waters in the west, a similar massive lost continent appears in the collective memory of the Eastern world, Kumari Kandam. In Tamil literature and Hindu cosmology, this enormous landmass, believed to stretch from the southern tip of India to Madagascar and Australia, is accepted as the true cradle of Tamil culture. And its progression from myths to the present has been in an extremely interesting way. In 1864, the zoologist Philip Sclater was in a great dilemma because the theory of plate tectonics was not yet known. He was finding lemur fossils in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. For this reason, following simpler logic, Philip suggested that there was once a massive landmass in the middle of the Indian Ocean that connected these two regions and later sank into the waters. and he called this island Lemuria. However, what happened next was that the Tamils, who already had the legend of Kadalkol, the island swallowed by the sea, in their ancient texts immediately put forward that this was the found lost island of their sacred ancestors, and the event spread instantly. Yet some historical information actually exists behind the matter. Kumari Kandam is not just a mythological place. At the same time, it is the place where the three Sangams, the literary academy systems, where Tamil language and literature were refined, were born. According to traditional chronology, the first two of these academies were founded in cities swallowed by the sea, and the narrative is as follows. The first Sangam was established in the city of South Madurai, which was swallowed by the sea. It lasted 4,400 years and was managed with the participation of 549 poets, including gods. The second Sangam continued for 3,700 years in the city of Kapatapuram, but this place was also submerged by a great flood. The third Sangam was established in the city of Madurai, which exists in India today, and the foundations of the surviving Tamil classics were laid there. Tamil texts describe Kumari Kandam in detail as being divided into 49 separate regions, having massive mountain ranges and river systems like the Paruli. Although modern plate tectonics says such a massive continent could not have existed in the Indian Ocean 10 to 12,000 years ago, seabed mapping studies prove that during the last glacial maximum, around 19,000 BC, sea levels were up to 200 meters lower. This situation shows us that the shallows between Sri Lanka and India, known today as Adam's Bridge or Ramasetu, and appearing in local legends as a piece of a sunken landmass, were once a settlement. In fact, the Tamil epic Silapadikaram mentions a giant port city called Pompuhar sinking in a single day. And indeed, thanks to research conducted in the 1990s, city ruins discovered to be man-made were found 5 kilometers offshore at a depth of about 25 meters. In another mythological account, the city of Dwaraka, belonging to the god Krishna, is mentioned, and it is told that when he died, the ocean swallowed the city. In excavations led by Dr. S.R. Rao, a port city with wide streets and massive stone walls was actually found underwater in the places mentioned in the myth. And carbon tests, performed on findings on the seabed, showed its age could go back even further than 7,000 BC. Now, if we handle the matter transparently, according to geological data and our current information capacity, there are no traces of a massive continent called Lemuria collapsing between India and Australia. The Lima theory can already be explained by events like continental tectonics, as I said. However, this does not mean everything is a myth. Even this Google Earth visual you see with our current limited sea mapping technologies gives us information about what happened. In the period before the Younger Dryas, sea levels are thought to have been up to 200 meters lower than today. Accordingly, almost all the areas you see now were once a coastline, and it is thought that in places up to 350 kilometers of these strips were swallowed by giant tsunamis and floods. Imagine Antalya being swallowed by waters and people having to flee all the way to Eskişehir. And considering that ancient cities in those times were founded in coastal areas like sea and riverbanks, it's not very hard to understand how many ancient settlements are currently at the bottom of the sea. We are talking about extremely dramatic and destructive events. Another famous subject of the sunken giant island narrative is the Mu continent account, which even attracted the attention of Ataturk. The idea of Mu was first brought to us by Augustus Le Plongeon, a British-American antiquarian and researcher who studied ancient Mayan ruins and claimed to have controversially translated Mayan inscriptions. Le Plongeon claimed that the continent of Mu was in the Atlantic and was the same place as Atlantis, and that Queen Mu, who survived the disaster, went to Egypt, took the name Isis, and founded Egyptian civilization. However, the person who actually popularized the Mu legend and constructed it as a massive Pacific empire was the British writer and engineer James Churchward. In a book series he published in the 1920s, Churchward put forward the idea that Mu was a highly advanced solar empire that existed 50,000 years ago, stretching from Hawaii to Easter Island, with a population of 64 million, and it instantly created great excitement worldwide. The basis for Churchward's massive claims rested on the Nakal tablets he saw and deciphered in the underground vault of the Sri Ekambaranatha temple in the city of Kanchipuram, while serving as a soldier in India. According to his claim, these tablets were written in the Nagamaya language, the first language of humanity, which only 3 priests could read. and according to translations, he claimed the tablets told of the priestly class called Nayakals, whose continent was destroyed in a night as a result of the collapse of massive underground gas-filled chambers. Nayakal information supposedly came through messengers who brought civilization to places like India, Babylon, Egypt, and Mesoamerica before the flood. Although names like German researcher Thomas Ritter went to this temple years later to try and verify the claims, it was scientifically proven that the tablets found were ordinary mantra plaques used in Hindu temple rituals and simple land grant documents written in Tamil. I have a detailed video about Mu. I recommend those interested to watch it because it's a subject with deeper details. However, the motif is not hard to see here. Yes, the flood event is written in all ancient civilizations. And yes, this is now scientifically known too. But this does not mean everything everyone says is correct. Churchward analyzed ancient texts nicely, took this sunken continent legend and marketed it well. In my opinion, this doesn't show the myth is wrong, just that the event was told in a distorted way. Indeed, Stephen Oppenheimer, a geneticist and researcher at Oxford University, brings a different perspective to events in his groundbreaking work Eden in the East, suggesting that the main center of Atlantis and sunken continent legends was Sunderland in Southeast Asia. Due to low sea levels during the last glacial maximum, Borneo, Java, Sumatra, and the Malay Peninsula were connected to each other and the Asian mainland, forming a massive continent approximately 1,800,000 square kilometers, twice the size of India. With its equatorial climate, this continent was a true paradise for people fleeing the freezing cold of the Ice Age, and the island is referred to as Sunderland today. I'm talking about this enormous region you see now. However, this massive continent was permanently erased from the map by the melting of glaciers. New interdisciplinary studies led by Nanyang Technological University have proven the demographic consequences of sea level rise using high-resolution genome sequencing and paleogeographic mapping. In geological records, meltwater pulse 1A occurred approximately 14,500 to 14,000 years ago, and meltwater pulse 1B occurred approximately 11,500 to 11,200 years ago, raising sea levels at an abrupt and terrifying speed. These sudden rises caused more than 50% of Sunderland's land area to be submerged. And according to Oppenheimer, this rapid flood in Southeast Asia displaced a massive society. Due to increased population pressure and submerged fertile river deltas, this population was forced into a massive mandatory migration toward India, Mesopotamia, China, and the open Pacific to survive. Later research has also proven that this migration actually took place. So, was there really an island? Or were what happened related to the floods occurring naturally with melting glaciers? Actually, this isn't an answer that can be given so easily, because something really went seriously wrong about 12,000 years ago, and the world we knew ended. While there are those who base this on ancient texts and conclude that an advanced civilization survived and rebuilt the world, mainstream academia insistently says this cannot be so, because it would fundamentally contradict the classical evolution thesis of civilization. However, discoveries made every day show us that this stereotyped thesis will soon collapse, and one of the ground zeros of this collapse will probably be our beautiful country. The most concrete and indisputable archaeological finding bridging the gap between ancient priest legends and geological catastrophes is Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in 1994, Göbekli Tepe, according to carbon tests, extends to exactly 11,600 years ago. To that traumatic date when the Younger Dryas period ended, meltwater pulse 1b began, and Plato said Atlantis sank. The sudden erection of massive T-shaped limestone megaliths weighing 10 to 20 tons by a supposedly simple hunter-gatherer society without even pottery, without knowing the wheel and metal tools, carving complex astronomical symbols, constellation figures like vultures, snakes, and scorpions, and 3D perfect animal reliefs is an unexplainable leap in civilization that contradicts the Darwinist understanding of historical evolution. Now, some might have been triggered as soon as the word Darwin was mentioned, so an explanation needs to be made for this too. The Darwinist historical evolution understanding, the approach claiming humanity civilized lineally as first hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then industry, and that the strong society will crush the weak, with only those who adapt and do not resist surviving, has nothing to do with Darwin himself. Darwin did a biological study and basically stayed there, and his work is truly important for biology. However, what is happening here is that power holders, for reasons I don't understand at all, Place Darwin at the foundation of modern science, and then attach his name to everything as if it were an approach that must be correct, trying to wash people's brains. Just as they add a sense of seriousness or legitimacy to every fabricated hadith by attributing it to the Prophet, these types, who have nothing to do with science but try to turn science into a corrupt religion of the modern world, do the same. You add the word Darwinian in front of a title and hurl insults at those who question it and refuse to comply as bigots and enemies of science. And this approach is what I criticize as mainstream science, mainstream academia, an approach that tries to divide you into classes, showing your obedience as if it were a natural evolutionary process, making the crushing of the weak by the strong nation look legitimate and turning time and human beings into a linear, sterile progression, robotizing them. We will all one day see how this is banned and viewed as a shame of the past. After my classic rebellion, let's continue. Many researchers studying the development of civilization in a multidisciplinary way support that Göbekli Tepe and sister settlements like Karahan Tepe are not the product of the slow evolution of hunter-gatherers, but on the contrary, were built with knowledge possessed in the past by a pre-flood civilization or survivors of the flood. The stylized human arms, hands, and belt depictions on the T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe suggest that these stones could be sculptural representations of spiritual leaders, perhaps the tall divine creator beings described in the Edfu texts. Furthermore, the fact that Göbekli Tepe was suddenly abandoned after about 1,000 years of use and was very deliberately buried by pouring thousands of tons of earth and rubble over it, or naturally remained under the earth due to a flood-like event, could be an indication that it was designed as a time capsule for future, namely modern-day people trying to preserve post-flood knowledge as was attempted at the Sphinx. The most important thing supporting this claim is both that Göbekli Tepe coincides with the exact time of the Younger Dryas, the flood, and that according to some researchers, the motifs of a falling meteor being recounted alongside a headless human motif and a scavenger vulture figure at the bottom of the stone show a great slaughter or disaster took place. These motifs tie all this together very well in the same pot. Of course, this is an interpretation. However, when we cross-link events, it is an interpretation that does not sound absurd at all. And this event is not limited to Göbekli Tepe either. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, detected water erosion on the body of the Great Sphinx and its surrounding limestone enclosure caused by heavy and continuous rainfall rather than wind and sand, during detailed seismic and geological analyses he conducted on the Giza Plateau in the 1990s. While mainstream Egyptologists try to explain the wear on the Sphinx with salt crystallization, Schoch rejects this hypothesis. For water erosion features are not distributed equally in the Sphinx's ditch. They are concentrated especially on the western wall, where water ran off and created severe vertical fissures. However, the problem is this: such severe and continuous rains that would crack the Sphinx's rocks in the Egyptian climate were last seen at the end of the last ice age, 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. That is, once again, within the range of the Younger Dryas period. Although traditional Egyptology claims the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC by Pharaoh Khafra during the 4th dynasty, geological evidence reveals that the main body of the Sphinx dates to a much earlier period, the Zep-Tepi age mentioned in the Edfu texts, just before the waters swallowed the region. And at the core of these claims lies the place where the Sphinx has its eyes fixed. That is, where the constellation of Leo, like itself, rose in its own astronomical age, which is once again between 10,800 BC and 8,640 BC. Now, if something happens once, you call it a coincidence. If it happens twice, you say it draws attention. But if it happens 3 times, you say it is now the truth. According to all this, if we summarize everything, whether the name is Atlantis, Kumarikandam, or Mu, the evidence that human history experienced a great break at the end of the Pleistocene period is too consistent to be ignored. The 9,000-year past whispered by countless priests to Solon is confirmed today by platinum traces found in ice cores, massive stone blocks on the ocean floor, fishmen sages we encounter in every corner of the world, and the finding of ancient cities swallowed by waters mentioned in myths, structures belonging exactly to the period called the Flood, like Göbekli Tepe, completely throw away the history thesis imposed on us by someone. And considering the research results made thanks to developing technology, such as the Sphinx being subjected to intense water erosion and its astronomical alignment facing where the Leo constellation rose, and the fact that independent stories told all over the world point to this period we better understand that the time has come for us to think outside the boxes and that we are probably living in a huge historical lie. If we take into account that the Greek philosophers and sages who laid the foundation of Western civilization carried the knowledge of the past to the West with the deep education they received in Egypt and India, and if we consider with an open mind and evidence their accounts saying a great event once happened and a place that was the representation of civilization went underwater, as I said, no matter the name, the fact that our past is being hidden from us emerges in a concrete way. Yes, if we set out to criticize the types who hide this and the servants who support them, dozens of video topics would emerge. However, I want to ask this here. If everything is cyclical, as the ancients said, and we have finally understood, could these disasters also be cyclical? The Sphinx showing Leo, Göbekli Tepe showing Scorpio and Leo, the Giza pyramids showing Orion, and the account of the celestial serpent that the ancient sages insistently drew attention to, coming when the positions of the stars changed. Are they perhaps serving as a warning sign carved in stone for us? Are they saying, look, this happened to us, be careful, will it happen again one day? I would never want the answer to this question to be yes. But next week, we will set out on another journey together that unfortunately brings us the possibility that this answer could be yes. And our ancient series will end with the evidence of a large possible threat, with the reality that the cosmic cycle is coming for us once again. Thank you for watching the video. You can also share your ideas and information on the subject in the comments section to benefit those who want to do research. I have many videos belonging to the subheadings mentioned in the video, and they will all be waiting for you at the bottom of the description section. Since the channel is like a jigsaw puzzle, I recommend you watch them too. See you next week. Take good care of yourselves.